Namo Adita Phat. Thanks so much for joining me for our daily practice check-in. Listen, listen, listen. This wonderful sound calls us back to our true home. The third mindfulness training. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I vow to cultivate responsibility and learn ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. I'm determined not to engage in sexual relations without love and a long-term commitment. To preserve the happiness of myself and others, I'm determined to respect my commitments and the commitments of others. I will do everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to prevent couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. For our Dharma lessons, we're reading Everything We Do Matters by the Venerable Wuling, and we're continuing today in Chapter 9, Climate Change. With our thoughts, we create our world. Ice caps and glaciers melted. The world's most famous cities underwater. 1/3 of the planet turned to desert, the other 2/3 filled with people struggling for enough food and water to survive. Is this to be our future? Our world is spiraling out of control, and yet we still have leaders failing to take action on global warming. Newscasters and journalists report on how the stock market bounced back after some minor profit-taking and what the latest tidbits from Hollywood are. People complain about the price of gasoline as they get back into their SUV and drive off alone. Parents shake their heads and worry about how climate change will affect their children, then board the plane to go visit their children and grandchildren because they love them. On March 11, 2007, the Sunday Times, a major newspaper in the United Kingdom, detailed the earth-changing scenarios, degree by degree, that would likely occur in global warming. The article was an interview with Mark Linus, the author of 6 Degrees, Our Future on a Hotter Planet, and referenced research by the Hadley Center for Climate Change in the United Kingdom. Based on tens of thousands of pages of scientific research, 6 Degrees provides a succinct analysis of what the world could look like after global warming. Quote, at 1 degree of warming, the Arctic is ice-free for half the year. The South Atlantic, typically void of hurricanes, experiences coastal hurricanes, and in the western U.S., severe droughts are plaguing residents. 2 degrees of warming, polar bears struggle to survive as glaciers increasingly melt away. Glaciers in Greenland begin to disappear, while coral reefs are vanishing. 3 degrees of warming, the Amazon rainforest is drying out, and El Niño's intense weather pattern becomes the norm. Europe repeatedly experiences some searing summer heat that has rarely happened before. 4 degrees of warming, oceans could rise, taking over coastal cities. The disappearance of glaciers may deprive many of fresh water. Northern Canada's agriculture could boom, and a Scandinavian beach could be the next tourism hotspot. A part of Antarctica could collapse, causing water to rise even further. 5 degrees of warming. Uninhabitable zones could spread. Snowpack and aquifers feeding big cities could dry up, and climate refugees could run in the millions. Human civilization could begin to break down with this drastic of changes to the climate. The poor would likely suffer the most. 6 degrees of warming. The oceans could be marine wastelands, the deserts could march across continents, and natural disasters could become common events. The world's great cities could be flooded and abandoned. This could be the doomsday scenario. End quote. For the past 150 years, we were slowly drawn in by cheap, accessible energy. It became inevitable that the environmental costs of pollution and resource depletion, not borne by consumers, would fall on others. In time, as healthcare problems arose, These costs were borne by taxpayers who were not quite sure exactly where their tax dollars went. But as long as the system seemed to be working, few people were inclined to ask questions. Periodically, a story would be on the news: the deplorable conditions miners labored under, increasing cancer rates, inequality issues, but people did not connect the dots. Most were engrossed with commercials after the news and dreaming of what to buy next. How did they get to this point? As consumers after World War II, Americans became caught up in the government promoted dream of owning a house in the suburbs. There was seemingly endless land, government programs and loans for the soldiers returning home, and lots of cheap oil to power the dream. So Americans in record numbers began moving to the new suburbs. Dad drove into the city to work while Mom stayed home and looked after the children. It seemed idyllic, but somewhere along the way, the dream of suburbia became complicated. People got caught up in the tragically mistaken idea that possessions and experiences would make them happy. The message they kept hearing was, more is better. Gradually, the houses became larger and families found themselves separated as grown children, now with their own dreams of an idyllic life, left home to work in other places. Without the grandparents around to help care for the children, Mom needed to get a job to help pay for childcare. Dad found he needed to work longer hours to be able to afford all the good things they wanted for their children. Short on time, the parents turned to the new electronic help. Dishwashers, washing machines, and vacuum cleaners were soon deemed household necessities. The number of must-have electronic appliances increased as more products came to market. But with planned obsolescence carefully calculated to increase corporate profits, the cars and all the other modern gadgetry needed to be frequently replaced. Since there was so much land and so many garbage dumps, the no longer wanted goods were simply thrown away. Plastic, polystyrene, and other petroleum byproducts that would take centuries to break down ended up at dump sites. Toxins began to leach into the soil and groundwater, but it was okay because there was so much land. As the list of modern conveniences grew, time-honored household skills were deemed old-fashioned and unnecessary in the modern world. The victory gardens that were a major source of food during the war gave way to lawns and flower beds. There was no need to cook anymore because there were TV dinners and prepared foods that would be quickly heated up by a mom now very tired from working all day at the office or factory. There was no need to personally preserve foods anymore because there were lots of canned and frozen food in the supermarket. Dad forgot the skills he had learned from his father because it was now easier to hire people to do what needed to be done. Plus, he had all those time-saving power tools and could buy ready-made items at the store. People, hooked on the electronic marvels to do their work, became increasingly dependent on all the cheap energy that powered their lifestyles. Today, none of this has changed. We see people buying larger houses to store all the new electronic gear. The children, seeing mom and dad buying more, want their own televisions and computers just like all their friends have. Families might gather to eat dinner at the same time, but everyone heats up their own food in the microwave. After throwing away the microwavable containers, tossing the pizza carton in the trash, and putting the cutlery in the dishwasher, parents and children go to their own rooms. They then immerse themselves in their home entertainment centers or play games on their computers until it's time to go to sleep. Then in the morning, it's time to get up and begin all over again. And so we have the American dream today, a dream that many people around the world want to have, but this dream has gone terribly wrong. From deep within each person who begins to grasp the enormity of climate change and global warming, a profound sense of grief and fear begins to arise. Humanity's dream of prosperity is now becoming a nightmare. We are now learning what the future of our world will be like. And with this realization comes another, that 6 degrees future has already begun, and it's even more horrific than we feared. Climate change has been called the elephant in the living room. Think of it as a large, unruly guest who does whatever it wishes to do. But climate change is not the only elephant. Peaking oil, natural gas, coal, and uranium resources are another 4. Then there is aquifer depletion and a human population the size of which the earth cannot sustain. It takes so much land and water to feed one human, and we have only a finite amount of these resources in our world. Once we exceed that natural carrying capacity, there's no longer enough food and water for everyone. Our current world situation is that we are at the brink of an energy crisis that began with global oil reserves peaking. The U.S. Energy Information Administration reported in 2007 that the peak occurred in May 2005. It's more difficult to gauge natural gas reserves, but it's generally accepted that they have either also peaked or are close to doing so. Coal and uranium are expected to peak around 2020 and before 2050, respectively. Oil, natural gas, coal, uranium, and hydroelectric currently provide 93% of the global energy supply. The remaining 7% is mainly hydropower, followed by biomass, with a fraction provided by renewables like solar and wind power. Peak resources means we have reached the point in time when the maximum production rate of the resource has been reached. Once past the peak, these natural resources will become increasingly difficult and costly to extract and process. As the prices rise, each of us will reach our personal peak, the point where our life is impacted negatively by the high cost brought about by the ever-increasing competition for the remaining oil. Also, we're moving closer to the point at which extraction and production costs outweigh the energy obtained. We can see the logic in this with our food. It would make no sense to expend 100 calories to eat food that will only provide 10 calories of energy. In addition to extraction, production, and distribution costs, there are the hidden costs like pollution, aquifer depletion, soil degradation, and human health issues. These costs are not calculated in the price of the pump when we fill up our cars, or at the store when we buy a box of imported chocolate encased in layers of plastic packaging. The costs are being borne by taxpayers and those who are forced off the land by governments and international conglomerates who are focused on profit, not on climate change or the suffering of humans. These millions of economic refugees have no choice but to move into cities where they cannot find work or raise the subsistence crops that used to feed their families. The costs are borne by the children who must breathe polluted air, drink contaminated water, and live in squalid conditions. Children who have no future, for they will not be able to make a living or farm the land. Nor will they be taught by those who dispossess them how to provide for their own families in the future. May all beings without exception, including you, including me, be well and know the causes and conditions for well-being. May all beings without exception, including you, including me, be happy and know the causes and conditions for happiness. And may all beings without exception, including you, including me, be peaceful and know the causes and conditions that bring about peace. Namo Adida Phat. Thanks so much for joining me today.